Good morning, and everyone, welcome to the National Press Theatre. Today we have with us Cystic Fibrosis Canada, who's going to be talking about some proposed regulatory changes, and I would like to just make sure that everybody understands that they're going to make some opening statements, and then we'll go to the floor for some questions. Just make sure your cell phones are turned to vibrate. You don't want to have that ringtone where it's hotline bling that rings in the middle of the press conference, please. So I will ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves, and they'll make an opening statement, and then we'll go to questions. So
Great.
the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Kelly Grover, the President and CEO of Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian cystic fibrosis community and calling on the federal government to take action for our community. In May of 2017, Health Canada proposed an update to several aspects of the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, the PMPRB's regulations governing patented medicines. These changes would incorporate new factors in the determination of whether a medicine is being or has been sold at an excessive price. Since the changes to the patented medicines regulations were first proposed, the patient community has consistently raised concerns that these changes will negatively impact access to new medicines for Canadian patients. The new PMPRB regulations will require patented drug manufacturers to significantly reduce their prices. By some estimates, price drops between 45% to 75% will be required, making Canada an outlier amongst OECD countries and a much less attractive market in which to launch innovative therapies, including precision medicines that can alter the course of devastating diseases like cystic fibrosis. The PMPRB and the federal government have repeatedly assured Canadian patient groups that access to new medicines will not be impacted by the proposed regulatory changes. Unfortunately, we are here today to say that access to new drugs for cystic fibrosis patients has not only been delayed, but may be denied. Access to a new life-changing drug for up to 90% of Canadian patients living with cystic fibrosis has been delayed and is at risk of not coming to Canada at all. When asked why the drug has not been introduced in Canada, the manufacturer of this drug, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, has pointed to concerns about the regulatory changes Canada is poised to adopt. This drug, called Trikafta, was fast-tracked for approval in the United States and in the UK and is on track for approval in Europe. It's currently available in the US. It represents the single biggest advancement in treating cystic fibrosis in the history of the disease and has been proven to significantly improve health outcomes for up to 90% of CF patients. But Canadians don't have access to it, and people are dying while waiting for access to this drug. We cannot sit idly by while our community suffers. Cystic fibrosis patients, all Canadian patients, deserve a system that enables access to new life-changing medicines, not one that unfairly and unnecessarily delays or denies access to these medicines. We want to be clear about our position. Cystic Fibrosis Canada supports the policy goal of lowering drug prices in Canada. We expect pharmaceutical manufacturers to bring their products to market at a reasonable price. But we also expect the government to ensure that the regulatory environment in Canada does not unnecessarily limit our ability to access new life-saving therapies. This situation should be a wake-up call for all Canadians. Cystic fibrosis patients may be the first to feel the impact of these proposed changes, but we won't be the only ones. Other pharmaceutical manufacturers have begun to delay introducing new medicines to Canada because of the proposed changes. Canadians should expect better. Recent discussions with the leadership of the PMPRB indicate that there is a desire to get this right and an intent to find a way to lower drug costs while also ensuring access to innovative, life-changing medications. And this is encouraging, but we know that getting it right will take some time, and we're running out of time before changes are set to come into effect on July 1st. But more importantly, there are thousands of Canadians living with CF that are running out of time. On their behalf, we call on the federal government to stop the implementation of these proposed changes to the PMPRB and reconsider the changes so that access to new drugs like Trikafta will not be delayed or denied. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Dr. Tullis.
My name's Elizabeth Tallis, and I'm the director of the Toronto Adult Cystic Fibrosis Clinic and a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. I'm talking today to represent the CF community of healthcare professionals and, of course, the patients. And I'd like to start by saying that Canada is a leader in CF. Why do I say that? Well, 30 years ago, Canadian scientists announced the discovery of the CF gene. And Canadian healthcare, with access to all for life-changing treatments such as lung transplants as well as multidisciplinary care, has meant that the survival for people with cystic fibrosis in Canada is the best in the world. In fact, Canadians with CF have a median survival that's 10 years better than Americans. These are things that make me proud to be a Canadian and happy to be in the field I'm in. However, it's not all good news. Every year in Canada, 50 to 60 people with CF die, and half of those people are under the age of 30. As a personal, from a personal point of view, in my 30 years as a CF doctor, more than 400 of my patients have passed away. And I remember each and every one of them. And those facts are not ones that make me feel happy or proud. Now, the discovery of the CF gene 30 years ago was a watershed moment. It was the first time that we could understand the basic defect in CF and understand what was the beginning of what started the cascade that leads to the progressive and fatal end. And with this discovery becomes the ability for drug development to actually have a paradigm shift to treat the basic defect rather than the downstream consequences. Now, these medications that have been developed over the last 10 years and are still being developed with each sort of subsequent generation of medications coming out, these drugs are known as Cftr modulators, because they work at the basic CFTR gene and the protein product. And these drugs have been demonstrated in studies and in real life experience to have important outcomes for people with CF. They improve lung capacity. They reduce hospitalizations. They even reduce the number of transplants needed, and they have reduced deaths. So these are important outcome measures that have been measured and demonstrated in studies and also through national registries such as exist in Canada. But my personal experience is such that I've seen people who are continually coming into hospital, not have a hospitalization in over 5 years. I've seen people able to go back to work or continue their education. I've seen people on oxygen be able to come off oxygen. And I've even seen people have their lung function double and be able to come off the lung transplant list. So the impact of these medications is far-reaching and significant, and you know, that is speaking as a CF physician, and you will hear later what it's like as somebody with CF and their family. So where we are now is kind of an important moment in time. And if you think about sort of what I want people with CF to live long and fulfilling lives. And I want people with CF to have access to effective, novel therapies as soon as they're available. And I want Canada to continue to be a leader in CF care. And I'm concerned that we will fall behind other countries if we don't have access to life-saving medications. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tallis. Hello, my name is Nadine Imblo Redmond. I'm the mother of 2 young adults fighting for their lives with cystic fibrosis. My eldest son, Paul, is with us today. My sons, Paul and Anthony, were diagnosed together in 1998, shortly after my youngest son's birth. Since that day, our family has been battling every day of their lives to give them and all with CF hope and a fighting chance against this genetic, fatal, and life-shortening disease. They have endured hours of daily chest physiotherapy, taking fistfuls of pills every day of their lives to alleviate symptoms, many courses of IV antibiotics, hundreds of medical procedures, and hospitalization. We, along with thousands of CF families, have worked tirelessly for decades, persevered, sacrificed a whole lot, supported and funded research and clinical care, prayed and dreamed for the day when medical research would discover and develop an effective treatment that could possibly control and or even cure the disease. Finally, the day has come with Trikafta. But instead of celebrating, we now find ourselves not only fighting this devastating disease on a daily basis, but also a broken drug review and reimbursement system in Canada that is potentially setting up barriers from making it possible for new breakthrough drugs and therapies like Trikafta from coming to Canada. It's absolutely maddening and heartbreaking. Living with CF is like living with the threat of COVID-19 every day of our lives. I'll now pass it to my son, Paul.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Paul Redmond. I'm 24 years old, and I live with cystic fibrosis. I fight every day of my life to be able to breathe and eat without major difficulty. As my disease has progressed over time, the symptoms and recurring lung infections get harder and harder to treat and fight back. These last few years have been particularly difficult. I've been in and out of hospital and on home care just about every month. My full-time job now is just trying to manage the daily symptoms and make it through to another day. I deal with shortness of breath, frequent coughing attacks, vomiting, digestive pain, diarrhea, and the list goes on. The side effects of current antiquated treatments are also just about as hard to deal with as the disease itself. I'm here today because I'm fighting for my life and for the lives of all battling cystic fibrosis. Living with CF is debilitating. It strips us of our quality of life, cuts our lives short, and robs us of our futures. This could all change for the better with Trikafta. Without efficient and timely access to new drugs like Trikafta, my life here in Canada is being changed to IV antibiotic treatments, growing antibiotic resistance, recurring life-threatening lung infections, digestive disease, frequent and costly hospital admissions, progressively declining health, unable to work, and dependent on disability income support. I will need a double lung transplant before the age of 30. Chances are I will die before then. This could all change for the better with Trikafta. I may never need a lung transplant. I could get my life back. I could continue to pursue my career again, marry my high school sweetheart, and plan to live a much longer, healthier, and productive life. Every Canadian deserves the right and best chance to live a healthier life. I am fighting for my life, and I need my country to also care about my life. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Wallenberg. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Cystic Fibrosis Canada and a CF parent. Je répéterai quelque chose que Kelly a dit tantôt, que les nouveaux règlements obligeront les fabricants de médicaments brevetés à réduire significativement leur prix. Ceci rendra le Canada beaucoup moins attirant pour le lancement rapide des thérapies innovatrices, particulièrement pour les médicaments de précision qui peuvent modifier le cours des maladies dévastatrices telles que la fibrose kystique. On parle aujourd'hui d'un médicament pour la fibrose kystique, mais cette situation devrait donner lieu à une prise de conscience chez tous les Canadiens. Les patients atteints de fibrose kystique sont peut-être parmi les premiers à ressentir les effets des changements proposés, mais ils ne seront pas les seuls. On voit déjà des délais importants dans le lancement de nouveaux médicaments au Canada, ainsi qu'une réduction dans le nombre d'essais cliniques qui y sont lancés. Les Canadiens, Paul, devraient s'attendre à mieux. Canadians living with cystic fibrosis are running out of time. Every year, 50 patients die and another 50 will need lung transplants to avoid death. On their behalf, and on Paul's behalf, we call on the federal government to stop the implementation of the proposed changes to the PMPRB and reconsider those changes so that access to innovative new drugs like Trikafta will not be delayed or denied. Finally, we ask further that Health Canada, the PMPRB, CADTH, the PCPA, the provinces, and Vertex use all available tools to fast-track the review and approval process of Trikafta to get it to those who need it now. The lives of Canadians with cystic fibrosis and all Canadians literally depends on you.
Thank you very much. So we'll turn it to the floor in questions. So Laura, it's one question, one follow-up.
I'm just going to keep this till you take it away from me.
So Laura Osman from the Canadian Press, the floor is yours.
Since I have you to myself, I'm just going to ask a few questions. And to start with, I'm wondering if you can sort of explain in layman's terms what this drug does differently than other drugs, how it works.
So I'm going to pass that to Dr. Tellis.
So the category of Cftr modulators, of which Trikafta is one, is drugs that actually target the basic protein. So these are pills that you ingest that go through the body and correct the misshapen CF chloride channel or salt channel. And so because they correct the basic problem in all of the cells, they have the ability to help the symptoms in the lungs, in the digestive tract, in the sinuses, in the sweat gland work systemically throughout the body. And by correcting the protein that is abnormal, you're preventing the downstream consequences of the thick mucus and the ongoing infections, etc. So the drugs are different than the other medications because what we've had to date is sort of antibiotics to treat the infection that develops or mucus-thinning drugs to treat the thick mucus. But now we're dealing with something that prevents the mucus from getting thick and makes it easier for it to be cleared from the lungs, and therefore people don't get as many infections. So it really is a paradigm shift in therapy.
Symptoms.
Correct.
Right.
And it's targeted at the specific gene mutation or defect that patients have, and where Trikafta is different than other CFTR modulator drugs that have come before it is actually targets the mutations that 90% of people with CF in Canada have. So it has this ability to effectively treat a very large percentage of the Canadian CF population.
I'd like to add one thing in that these drugs are, as a class, the product of what's called precision medicine. And as such, they really are, if you will, at the fine point of science, la fine pointe de la science, and also they're really the future of medicine and the promise of precision medicine. So these changes impact not just Trikafta, but all drugs like this.
So can you paint me a picture of how the outcomes might be different for someone like Paul if they were to have access to this drug? How might their life look different 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
So we don't know far down the road, but we do have some experience with this class of medications that have been available since 2012. And what we've been able to show in real life and like following people in data registries is that because the mucus is thinner and is more easily cleared, people like Paul don't need to spend so much time doing their therapy. And because they can keep their lungs clear of the mucus, then they get less chest infections and therefore are not needing the hospital stays. And we know that those outcomes are associated with better survival overall. And the studies actually show that if you look at the American and the UK data registries, you can see there is a reduction in the number of lung transplants needed and a reduction in the deaths. So it makes day-to-day life better. People don't cough as much. People have, less shortness of breath. Better energy and, able to do things and be active and be able to go back to school or go to work. But more importantly, over time, the decline in lung function appears to slow. And getting to that end stage of transplant or death is moved further and further to the future.
And it says in your release that you're here to meet with government officials. Have you had those meetings yet? Or are they still to come?
They're later today, and we'll be meeting with staff in the Minister of Health's office and a few MPs that are interested in this issue. I think, we've had a number of, the community is a small but mighty community, and they're frustrated, as Nadine spoke about. There's been great investment made in this disease by parents and now by people living with cystic fibrosis, and they've been meeting across the country with their elected representatives. But we're really sounding the alarm bells today about this is an issue for cystic fibrosis, but as John said, it's an issue for all Canadians because this is the future of medicine, and we just happen to be the first drug or disease to be affected by the changes, and what a drug to be affected by. This is, as Dr. Tullis has said, this is, just a life-changing and has the potential to really have such an impact on people that they can marry their high school sweetheart, and who wouldn't want that? But certainly to live their lives and be able to play with their kids without having great impact on having good energy to do that, and to be working and maybe sitting on the side that you're sitting on and asking questions. So it certainly is. We're happy to have the meetings, but we'll continue until we get some action on this.
You've spoken to the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, and you have heard, positive feedback. Have you heard anything from the federal government or federal government officials?
No, nothing. No.
And these come into effect in July, you said?
July 1st.
Okay. Have you seen any changes to clinical trials in Canada since these regulations have been proposed?
So yes, there's been a significant drop. If we look at the most recent 6-month period since the implementation of the guidelines was announced, and you look at the same period over the previous 4 years, there's been a drop of about 60% in terms of the filing of clinical trials in Canada. So it's already having an impact on the industry in Canada. As well, we've seen a reduction in the number of drugs that have been filed with Health Canada for approval in Canada.
Can you spell out why we might be seeing fewer clinical trials in Canada?
Certainly. For example, if a company is bringing a drug to, especially one of these sorts of drugs to Canada, and they start a clinical trial, for example, the individuals who would have been in the clinical trial for Trikafta, they then continue on the drug afterwards in a rollover study. If the company has no reasonable prospect of commercializing the drug in Canada, they are going to be carrying those patients basically nonstop for the future. So it would give them pause to say, well, do we really want to have that burden on the company if there's no prospect for us ever getting reimbursed for those drugs? So it's going to put a chill on the industry in Canada.
Or they have to take the patient off the drug.
Yeah, but if you're dealing with a life-saving drug like this, that would be highly unethical.
You were talking about Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Can you expand a little bit on what roadblocks they're facing in bringing this through, given the regulations that have been proposed?
Yeah, so we can't, obviously, we're not from the manufacturer, so we can't speak on their behalf. What they've said publicly is that they have great concerns about the regulatory environment in Canada, and that has given them pause to consider bringing this drug to or to bring this forward to Health Canada for approval. I don't know, John, if you had anything to add on that.
I'd like to add something. One of the things that I learned when I was in oncology was that, people in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, the people at Vertex Canada, don't necessarily feel that they're in competition with other pharmaceutical companies. They're in competition with Vertex UK, Vertex Germany, Vertex France, Vertex Spain to bring the drug into Canada. And if Canada is providing low prices and high barriers to access, they're in a much less competitive position with those countries. Those countries are going to go in terms of priority. They're going to be prioritized over Canada.
Right. Have you proposed any countermeasures? Because Canada does want to keep drug prices low. So how do you do that without...
So there have been a couple opportunities for stakeholders to put submissions forward to the PMPRB, and we've done that twice, as have many other patient organizations. And these are complex policy issues. And so we can go into some of our changes and suggestions after the press conference if that works in a more fulsome interview, because I find that they're just complicated, and it's better to do that. But, you know, as I said earlier, Cystic Fibrosis Canada does agree with lowering drug prices. We absolutely do. But there certainly must be a balance, and I think there can be a balance between lowering drug prices and still ensuring that we see these exciting, you know, groundbreaking innovations that we all want to see brought forward. I mean, this is a fatal disease that people are still dying of a 50-50 chance of getting beyond their early 30s. And we can do something about this. Like, I just think everybody would bring their A game and all their solutions forward to make sure this happens. And so we have put forward some suggestions to the PMPRB, as have many others.
I'm curious about your feedback on pharmacare. Is that a potential solution to this problem if the government is going to be paying those drug costs, for example?
Yeah, John, do you want to speak to it?
So pharmacare there's a couple of things about pharmacare. One, the way certainly the plan was looking at it is there was going to be looking at implementing a strategy for rare diseases. And frequently when we're talking about precision medicines, because of the way they work, we're looking at smaller populations with often, because of that, more expensive drugs. And they weren't looking at implementing that until 2023. So that's way far out. But the other thing is that pharmacare isn't establishing the price. The PMPRB is establishing the price for the drugs come into Canada, and pharmacare won't solve that if the drugs aren't coming to Canada at all.
Jordan, I think I'm good.
Well, I was just going to ask, since I get to take this, I have the right as the chair to do this. Actually, Paul, I want to ask you something. You know, I know your mom was very eloquent, and she mentioned how living with cystic fibrosis is like living with, I think it was COVID-19 every day. And I just wanted to ask you, given what is happening in this country and the concerns about that, I'm wondering how you are feeling these days, walking around, as there is already, you have a heightened concern from a lot of Canadians. I'm just curious, what is the effect on your life, given that there is this heightened concern about a respiratory illness going around the country?
Yeah, certainly. So I still have to take care of myself. I still have to carry around Purell and kind of wear gloves and just have this extra heightened sense of security, because nowadays my health is so deteriorated that just even a common cold would put me in the hospital for a month. So just wearing gloves, wearing a mask whenever I'm around public atmospheres, especially in close quarters with people. I do have to be extra careful around people. And so with this COVID-19 scare that's coming in, it gives me an extra heightened sense of security. And with everyone else wearing masks and wearing gloves, I don't want to stay away from them, but I also just have to be extra careful with what I'm touching, and if I'm touching my face, and if someone's coughing around me, I have to wear a mask. And so I kind of have to quarantine myself from the public. But that's also just any ordinary day right now for me. If someone has a common cold, I have to quarantine myself away from them. Just for example, my dad has a cold right now, so I have to stay away from him. I can't be in the same section of the house that he's in. So it's very unfortunate the way that it is, because I don't feel normal, where I don't feel a normal active member of society, because I feel like I'm constantly sick or I'm a burden to most people.
So maybe I'll just ask you, because I think we have one more minute, and then, which is this. So the Prime Minister was just standing here a little while ago, and he said that the individual actions of Canadians can help contain this and make sure that the most vulnerable people like yourself don't catch it. So what would be your message to, if you could look in the cameras and say, tell the Canadians, what is your message to them about trying to make sure that you don't come into contact with someone who's got it?
Well, honestly, the best thing to do is to wash your hands, cough into your arm or sleeve, and just be aware that there are people that are very vulnerable out there, such as myself, that if we get a cold, I could die, basically. That's just the seriousness of it. And just wash your hands. If you have a cold or cough, just please stay away from from anyone else who may be vulnerable.
I would also say, if I had the Prime Minister in front of me, I would, which you knew I would say, but Paul could have a solution to making him better, and he wouldn't feel his burden on society, and we could get, quite an exciting innovation that we as Canadians should all be excited of investment, and then you reap the benefits. So that there's an easy answer to that.
Good.
Thank
All right,
you.
well, I think that's all the time we have, so thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.